A-mdo Tibetan, Wylie, A-mdo Wem.2, Chinese. Pinyin, and Do, also known as Domi Tibetan, is one of the three traditional Tibetan regions. It encompasses a large area from the Machi-Yellow River to the Dritsche Yangtze. A-mdo is mostly coterminous with China's present-day Qinghai province, but also includes small portions of Sichuan and Gansu provinces. In the 7th century, A-mdo became a part of the Tibetan Empire until its dissolution in the 9th century. A local Tibetan theocracy called Sangha ruled the region from 997 to 1104. In the 13th century, Mongol forces conquered the area, which led to the beginning of a priest and patron relationship. From the 14th to the 16th century, the Ming dynasty controlled some border areas of A-mdo, while Mongol presence remained significant. In the 1720s, the Yongjing Emperor of Qing dynasty seized A-mdo from the Zhengars and began forming the modern boundaries of Qinghai. He allowed most of the area to be administered by a series of local Tibetan rulers associated with the Jitsang government through monastery systems but not directly governed by the Dalai Lama's Ganden Phodring. From 1917, parts of A-mdo were occupied by warlords of the Ma clique, who joined the Kuomintang Chinese Nationalist Party in 1928. By 1952, Chinese Communist Party forces had annexed central Tibet and defeated both Kuomintang and Tibetan forces, solidifying their hold on the area roughly by 1958. Tibetans in A-mdo traditionally engaged in agriculture and pastoralism. The region is the home of many Tibetan Buddhism spiritual leaders, such as the 14th Dalai Lama, the 10th Panchen Lama Choki Gyaltsen, and the great Gelug school reformer Jit Tsongkhapa. Names: A-mdo is one of the traditional regions of Greater or Ethnographic Tibet. The other regions are Jitsang, also known as Political or Central Tibet, to the southwest and Kham to the south. The name A-mdo has become more common since the 19th century. Older sources refer to roughly the same region as Domi. A-mdo and Kham together were also called Dukham on maps and manuscripts. Geography: A-mdo encompasses the upper reaches of the Machu or Yellow River and Lake Qinghai. Its southern border is the Bayanhar Mountains. The area is windswept and treeless, with much grass. Animals of the region consist of the wild yak and the kiang. Domesticated animals of the region consist of the domestic yak and zo, goats, sheep, and the Mongolian horse. A-mdo has been famous in epic story and in history as a land where splendid horses are raised and run wild. Demographics: Historical demographics. In historical times, the people of the region were typically non-Tibetan, such as the Mongols or the Hor people, although the latter were able to speak a Tibetan language. Other indigenous peoples included the Kong, the Sumpa, and the Tuyuan. People from A-mdo and Kham have traditionally identified themselves as A-mdois and Khampas rather than Tibetans, sometimes more connected to the Chinese than they were to Jitsang Central Tibet. Present demographics: the inhabitants of A-mdo are referred to as A-mdoa Tibetan. Wylie, A-mdo Paya is a distinction from the Tibetans of Khampa, Tibetan, Wylie, Khams Paya and Jitsang. However, they are all considered ethnically Tibetan. Today, ethnic Tibetans predominate in the western and southern parts of A-mdo, which are now administered as various Tibetan, Tibetan Kong, or Mongol-Tibetan autonomous prefectures. The Han Chinese are majority in the northern part Haixi Mongol and Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture and eastern part Shining City and Hedong City of Qinghai Province. While Shining City and Hedong City are geographically small compared to the rest of Qinghai Province, this area has the largest population density, with the result that the Han Chinese outnumber other ethnicities in Qinghai Province generally. The majority of A-mdo Tibetans live in the larger part of Qinghai Province, including the Mchobiang, Hebei in Chinese Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture Tap, Medcholo, Hainan Tap or Malo, Huangnan Tap, and Golog, Galuo Tap, as well as in the Kanlo, Gannan Tap of the southwest Gansu Province, and sections of the Ngaba, Aba Tibetan and Kong Autonomous Prefecture of northwest Sichuan Province. Additionally, a great many A-mdo Tibetans live within the Hedong, Wylie, Amchoshar Prefecture of Qinghai, which is located to the east of the Qinghai Lake, Wylie, Amcho Sangan and around Shining Ziling City, but they constitute only a minority ka. 8.5% of the total population there, and so the region did not attain tap status. The vast Haixi, Amdo Mongolian and Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture, to the west of the Qinghai Lake, also has a minority Tibetan population ca. 10%, and only those Tibetans in the eastern parts of this prefecture are A-mdo inhabitants. Mongols to have been long-term settlers in A-mdo, arriving first during the time of Genghis Khan, but particularly in a series of settlement waves during the Ming period. Over the centuries, most of the A-mdo Mongols have become highly Tibetanist and, superficially at least, it is now difficult to discern their original non-Tibetan ethnicity. Language. Main article. A-mdo Tibetan. There are many dialects of the Tibetan language spoken in A-mdo due to the geographical isolation of many groups. Written Tibetan is the same throughout Tibetan-speaking regions and is based on Classical Tibetan. Many non-Tibetans of the region are multilingual and can speak A-mdo Tibetan, making it difficult to ascertain their ethnicity based on language alone. History. 3rd century. The Kong people were early users of iron and stories abound of them in their iron breastplates with iron swords. 7th century. From the 7th through the 9th century, the Tibetan Empire expanded into A-mdo. The Kong, Sumpa, Tuyuan, and other peoples of the region were gradually Tibetanized. During this period, control of A-mdo moved from Songtsen Gampo and his successors to the royal family's ministers, the Gar-Wili. Gar. These ministers had their positions inherited from their parents, similar to the emperor. King Tuzong Hu tried to wrest control of this area from the ministers, unsuccessfully. 9th century. In 821, a treaty established the borders between the Tibetan Empire and the Tang dynasty, while 3 stelae were built, one at the border, one in Lhasa, and one in Chang'an. The Tibetan army settled within the eastern frontier. After 838, when Tibet's king Lang Dharma killed his brother, the Tibetan Empire broke into independent principalities, while Dukham A-mdo and Kem maintained culturally and religiously Tibetan. Within A-mdo, the historical independent polities of hereditary rulers and kingdoms remained, while Mongol and Chinese populations fluctuated among the indigenous peoples and Tibetans. During this time period, Buddhist monks from central Tibet exiled to the A-mdo region. There is a historical account of an official from the 9th century sent to collect taxes to A-mdo. Instead, he acquires a fief. He then tells of the 10 virtues of the land. 2 of the virtues are in the grass, 1 for meadows near home, 1 for distant pastures. 2 virtues in soil, 1 to build houses and 1 for good fields. 2 virtues are in the water, 1 for drinking and 1 for irrigation. There are 2 in the stone, 1 for building and 1 for milling. The timber has 2 virtues, 1 for building and 1 for firewood. The original inhabitants of the A-mdo region were the forest dwellers Nagspa, the mountain dwellers Ripa, the plains dwellers Thangpa, the grassmen Ritsumi, and the woodsmen Xingmi. The grassmen were famous for their horses. 10th and 11th century. Guasel is a monk that helped resurrect Tibetan Buddhism. He was taught as a child and showed amazing enthusiasm for the religion. When he was ordained, he went in search of teachings. After obtaining the Vinaya, he was set to travel to central Tibet, but for a drought. Instead, he chose to travel in solitude to A-mdo. Locals had heard of him and his solitude was not to be as he was sought after. In time, he established a line of refugee monks in A-mdo, and with the wealth that he acquired, he built temples and stupas also. The area was ruled by a Tibetan theocracy called Songkha from 997 to 1104. It was frequently drawn into conflicts with the Western Xia, formed by the Tangut people possibly of Kong descent, as well as the Song, Liao, and Jin dynasties. 13th century. The Mongols had conquered eastern A-mdo by 1240 and would manage it under the Bureau of Buddhist and Tibetan Affairs, separately from the other territories administered by the Yuan dynasty. A priest and patron relationship began. Drogon Chigyal Phagpa, a Tibetan Lama, visited Kublai Khan and became so popular that he was made Kublai's spiritual guide and later appointed by him to the rank of priest king of Tibet and constituted ruler of one Tibet proper, comprising the 13 states of Jitsang, Tukham, and 3 A-mdo, but kingdoms in A-mdo and Kham remained largely independent of central Tibet. He spent his later years at Sakya Monastery in Jitsang, which required that he travel through A-mdo regularly. On one of these trips, he encountered armed resistance in A-mdo and required escorts from Mongol princes to travel through A-mdo. While the concept of Tibet's three regions can be dated back to Tibetan Empire, Dunhuang manuscripts referring to the eastern parts of its territory as A-mdo Gams Tibetan and A-mdo Smad Tibetan, Yuan confirmed the division, and Du Kham as to well-defined commanderies, along with Jitsang, were collectively referred to as the three commanderies of Tibet since then. Tibet regained its independence from the Mongols before native Chinese overthrew the Yuan dynasty in 1368, although it avoided directly resisting the Yuan court until the latter's fall. By 1343, Mongol authority in A-mdo had weakened considerably. Fen's fiefdom had been leaderless for some time, and the Tibetans were harassing the Mongols near Liangzhou and Jios. In 1347, a general rebellion erupted in some 200 places in eastern Tibet, and though troops were sent to suppress them, by 1355 eastern Tibet was no longer mentioned in the dynastic history of the Mongols. 14th to 16th century. Although the following Ming dynasty nominally maintained the Mongol divisions of Tibet with some subdivision, its power is weaker and influenced A-mdo mostly at their borders. The Mongols again seized political control in A-mdo areas from the middle of the 16th century. However, the Ming dynasty continued to retain control in Hezhou and Shining Wei. As trade between Mongols, Tibetans, Muslim and Han Chinese deepened, a system of shijia developed around Gansu. They initially served as lodgings for travelers but eventually assumed additional responsibilities, such as regulating commerce, collecting taxes, and settling legal disputes alongside the local Yemens. 17th century. Upper Kakanar Mongols from northern Xinjiang and Khalkha came there in 16th and 17th centuries. Power struggles among various Mongol factions in Tibet and A-mdo led to a period alternating between the supremacy of the Dalai Lama nominally and Mongol overlords. In 1642, Tibet was reunified under the fifth Dalai Lama by gaining spiritual and temporal authority through the efforts of the Mongol king, Gushi Khan. This allowed the Gelug school and its incarnated spiritual leaders, the Dalai Lamas, to gain enough support to last through the present day. Gushi Khan also returned portions of eastern Tiber Kham to Tibet, but his base in the Kakanar region of A-mdo remained under Mongol control. '18th century. In 1705, with the approval of the Kangxi Emperor of the Qing dynasty, Lobzang Khan of the Koshit deposed the regent and killed the sixth Dalai Lama. The Jungar Mongols invaded Tibet during the chaos, and held the entire region until their final defeat by an expedition of the Qing Imperial Army in 1720. When the Manchu Qing dynasty rose to power in the early 18th century, it established Shining, a town to the north of A-mdo, as the administrative base for the area. A-mdo was placed within the Qinghai region. During this period they were ruled by the Amban, who allowed near total autonomy by the monasteries and the other local leaders. The 18th century saw the Qing Empire continue to expand further and further into Tibet as it engulfed eastern Tibet, including A-mdo, and even assumed control over central Tibet. The Yongzheng Emperor seized full control of Qinghai A-mdo in the 1720s. The boundaries of Shining Prefecture, which contains most of A-mdo, with Sichuan and Tibet proper, was established following this. The boundary of Shining Prefecture and Jitsang, or central Tibet, was the Dangla Mountains. This roughly corresponds with the modern boundary of Qinghai, with the Tibet Autonomous Region. The boundary of Shining Prefecture with Sichuan was also set at this time, dividing the Ingaba area of the former A-mdo into Sichuan. This boundary also roughly corresponds with the modern boundary of Qinghai with Sichuan. A new boundary, following the Ningqing mountain range, was established between Sichuan and Tibet. East of these mountains, local chieftains ruled under the nominal authority of the Sichuan provincial government. Lhasa administered the area to the west. The 1720s thus saw Tibet's first major reduction in area in centuries. The Gansu region bordering Tibet was administered by an imperial viceroy. Portions of the country were placed under Chinese law while the Tibetans enjoyed almost complete independence, ruled by Tibetan chiefs that held grants or commissions from the imperial government. Twentieth century. In 1906, the 13th Dalai Lama, while touring the country, was enticed by a procession of 1,000 lamas to stay at the temple at Kumbum. He spent a year resting and learning, among other things, Sanskrit and poetry. In 1912, Qing dynasty collapsed and relative independence followed, with the Dalai Lama ruling central Tibet. Eastern Tibet, including A-mdo and Kham, were ruled by local and regional warlords and chiefs. The Huid Muslims administered the agricultural areas in the north and east of the region. A-mdo saw numerous powerful leaders, including both secular and non. The monasteries, such as Labrang, Rebkong, and Toksang Lama, supervised the choosing of the local leaders or headmen in the areas under their control. These tribes consisted of several thousand nomads. Meanwhile, Sakwo, Ngawa, and Liulan had secular leaders appointed, with some becoming kings and even creating familial dynasties. This secular form of government went as far as Machu. The Muslim warlord Macha waged war in the name of the Republic of China against the Labrang Monastery and Galaks. After ethnic rioting between Muslims and Tibetans emerged in 1918, Macha defeated the Tibetans, then commenced to tax the town heavily for 8 years. In 1925, a Tibetan rebellion broke out, with thousands of Tibetans driving out the Muslims. Macha responded with 3,000 Chinese Muslim troops, who retook Labrang and machine-gunned thousands of Tibetan monks as they tried to flee. Macha besieged Labrang numerous times. The Tibetans and Mongols fought against his Muslim forces for control of Labrang, until Macha gave it up in 1927. His forces were praised by foreigners who traveled through Qinghai for their fighting abilities. However, that was not the last Labrang saw of General Ma. The Muslim forces looted and ravaged the monastery again. In 1928, the Ma clique formed an alliance with the Kuomintang. In the 1930s, the Muslim warlord Ma Bufang, the son of Ma Che, seized the northeast corner of A-mdo in the name of Chiang Kai-shek's weak central government, effectively incorporating it into the Chinese province of Qinghai. From that point until 1949, much of the rest of A-mdo was gradually assimilated into the Kuomintang Chinese provincial system, with the major portion of it becoming nominally part of Qinghai province and a smaller portion becoming part of Gansu province. Due to the lack of a Chinese administrative presence in the region, however, most of the communities of the rural areas of A-mdo and Kham remained under their own local Tibetan lay and monastic leaders into the 1950s. Tibetan region of Lojang and Gyarong in Kham, and Ngapa Chinese Aba and Galak in A-mdo were still independent of Chinese hegemony, despite the creation on paper of Qinghai province in 1927. The 14th Dalai Lama was born in the A-mdo region in 1935, and when he was announced as a possible candidate, Ma Bufang tried to prevent the boy from traveling to Tibet. He demanded a ransom of $300,000, which was paid, and then he escorted the young boy to Tibet. In May 1949, Ma Bufang was appointed military governor of northwest China, making him the highest-ranked administrator of the A-mdo region. However, by August 1949, the advancing People's Liberation Army PLA had annihilated Ma's army, though residual forces took several years to defeat. By 1949, advanced units of the PLA had taken much of A-mdo from the nationalists. By 1952, following the annexation of Tibet by the People's Republic of China, the major towns in the region were fully under the control of People's Republic of China, though many of the rural areas continued to enjoy de facto autonomy for several more years. Tibetan guerrilla forces in A-mdo emerged in 1956 and continued until the 1970s fighting the People's Liberation Army. In 1958, Chinese communists assumed official control of Tibetan regions in Kham and A-mdo. Many of the nomads of A-mdo revolted. Some areas were reported virtually empty of men. They either had been killed or imprisoned or had fled. The largest monastery in A-mdo was forced to close. Of its 3,000 monks, 2,000 were arrested. In July 1958, as the revolutionary fervor of the Great Leap Forward swept across the People's Republic of China, Xikou County in the A-mdo region of cultural Tibet erupted in violence against efforts by the Chinese Communist Party to impose rapid collectivization on the pastoral communities of the grasslands. Rebellion also stirred the region at the beginning of the 1950s as liberation first settled on the northeastern Tibetan plateau. The immediate ramifications of each disturbance, both for the A-mdo Tibetan elites and commoners, and for the Han cadres in their midst, elucidates early PRC nation-building and state-building struggles in minority nationality areas and the influence of this crucial transitional period on relations between Han and Tibetan in A-mdo decades later. As a prelude to the Beijing Olympics, protests broke out in 2008 in A-mdo, among other places. Some were violent, however the majority were peaceful. Monasteries. A-mdo was traditionally a place of great learning and scholarship and contains many great monasteries, including Kumbum Monastery near Xining, Rongwo Monastery in Rebgung, Labrang Monastery south of Lanzhou, and the Kurti Gompas of Angawa Tibetan and Kong Autonomous Prefecture and Tokseng Lamo in Zhoge County. From 1958 to 1962, the political climate in A-mdo was considered unbearable. In 1958, the arrest and murder of the Tsitan Monastery's Khenpo Jing Rigpai Nyingpo while incarcerated in Shining's Nantan prison marked the beginning of the period. Traditional economy. A-mdo Tibetans' traditional lifestyle and economy are centered on agriculture. Depending on the region and environment A-mdo Tibetans live in, they are either nomads Dragpa or farmers Shungpa. The economy of A-mdo has been constant throughout history and has changed little in the modern time. A typical family has two homes or bases, one for when they move up into the mountains with their animals in the summer for better grazing, and another down in the valleys where they weather harsh winters and grow fodder for their livestock in small agricultural fields. The families of some villages may make a shorter seasonal trek as their pasture may be nearby, and they may even migrate between homes each day. Local government. As in A-mdo and Kham, independent local polities were the traditional governing systems. In A-mdo, communities of nomads, farmers, horse traders, and monasteries were organized into these polities, which continued from the era of the Tibetan Empire. Varying in size from small to large, some were inherited while others were not, and both women and men were individual leaders of these polities. Soas, consisting of groups of families, are the basic socio-political organization. The Galak peoples, Gom and Letseng peoples arranged themselves in Soas. A larger organization is the Skar, translated as encampment, while larger still is the Nangso, translated as commissioner. There were also kingdoms, such as Kingdom of Koeni Chon. In 1624, for example, the Drotseng Nangso sponsored a monastery, which was called the Drotseng Sarg. The monastery at Detsa Nangso was called the Detsa Gompa. Earlier in 1376, a horse and tea trading station was in Koni. After the People's Republic of China's PRC was founded, Communist administrators overlaid a series of larger Tibetan autonomous prefectures tap on top of the existing county system, but only where Tibetans formed the majority of the population. This policy towards Tibetans, considered a minority nationality within their own country, was set down in the constitution of the PRC.